Hi, today we're going to be talking about emotional disturbance, which is one of the categories in IDEA that qualifies a student for special services. Emotional disturbance is essentially when a student's emotions are so difficult for them to control that they are unable to reach their academic potential. The official definition, according to IDEA, is when one or more of the following affects their student learning. So their inability to learn cannot be explained by health or sensory or intellectual factors. They can't maintain satisfactory relationships. They have inappropriate behavior or feelings in normal circumstances. There's unhappiness and depression, and physical symptoms or fears associated with school or personal problems. These need to be occurring over an extended period of time, and they need to be disrupting a student's learning, and a student must meet one or more of these criteria. This includes schizophrenia, which is thoughts and experiences that are totally disassociated from reality, but there is an exclusionary clause. It does not include social maladjustment. I was curious about that, so I looked into it. One psychiatrist differentiated social maladjustment from an emotional disorder by looking at the extremity and the motive of the behavior that manifests itself. So, for example, a student who is socially maladjusted might not do a homework assignment because they think it's boring or busy work, whereas a student who has deep fear and anxiety or frustration over an assignment and has an emotional disorder might not do the same assignment. Students who have an emotional disorders are usually looked at by their peers as being weird or separate, whereas students who have social maladjustment typically have a peer group that accepts them, and they might even have classroom sort of respect that's based a little bit on fear. Characteristics of emotional disturbance. They're not completely unlike behavioral issues that neurotypical students might exhibit. It's just that they're more frequent, they're more intense, and they last for longer, and they're disrupting a student's learning. Some characteristics of emotional disturbance. These come in two main categories. The first is internalized behavior, when the student is taking these emotions that they don't really know what to do with, and they're turning them inward. And the second is the externalizing behaviors, when all of that emotion is turned outward. It's usually in a bid to get attention, and it often adversely affects others. So here's some internalized behaviors that teachers should be mindful of. If a student is sad, depressed, or feeling worthless, if they have, repeating negative thoughts, a pattern that they can't break out of, if there's repetitive behavior, there's often stomach aches or headaches that are a result of fear and anxiety. There could be suicidal thoughts and discussions, decreased interest in prior hobbies and activities. They might be being bullied, and there may be signs of abuse. External behaviors, that's going to be repeated aggression, the arguing, the non-compliance, tantrums, lying, stealing, cheating, bullying, the lack of control. And this behavior often prevents a student from having positive relationships with classmates and school faculty. The emotional characteristics, like the drivers behind these behavioral issues that we just discussed, are typically very intense anxiety or fear. It can be a lot of anger. These students might have extremely low self-esteem because they haven't been successful in class or with their peers or at school. And a lot of times these chronic negative emotions can lead to depression, which is something we need to be particularly mindful of as educators, because untreated depression can lead to suicide. This is one of the top 3 causes for death in our teenagers, and teachers need to know and watch for these signs. They should be looking for impulsivity, perfectionism, a family history of suicide attempts, hopelessness, and a belief that death will be better. I also think it just makes sense to be mindful of, if you have a student that you're worried about, to be aware of what their home situation is like, and if a difficult home situation is matching up with some of these characteristics, it's time to reach out to the student and to hopefully get them the help that they need. Social characteristics of these students, they often do not have the social skills they need to build relationships. It can be because they haven't been living in an environment where they have been able to learn them, or it can be it's just extra difficult for them to figure it out. So educators need to explicitly teach these skills. Perhaps you could create a unit on social skills. You could teach basic manners. You can model those manners or those social skills, things like saying hello or joining a group of friends or asking to borrow a pencil or politely telling someone no when you don't want to share your pencil. Create a curriculum on that, you model it, and then you let the students practice with each other in social, in social situations that you create for them. Cognitive and academic characteristics, these are very intertwined. It's very difficult to tell which causes the other. Students who have emotional disturbance typically do less well in school and have academic problems. What we cannot determine is, do the academic problems cause these negative feelings that in turn lead to the behavioral issues, or do the behavioral issues, create problems with academic learning? It's sort of a cycle, and it's probably different for each student, but it's best for educators to be tackling the issue from both ends. So you should be mindful of the academic challenges that a student is facing, as well as the emotional challenges that they're facing. The prevalence, this is pretty common. 20% of students are being treated for mental health. A lot of this is happening privately and is not qualifying them for IDEA. But boys are diagnosed with a behavioral disorder 3 times as often as females, probably because of behavior bias, possibly because of behavior bias, and also because girls are more likely to display internalizing behaviors, and those are easier to miss. 5% of our children are experiencing depression, and this is equal between boys and girls during elementary, but by high school, we have twice as many females with depression. So we need to be really watching for that in our teenage girls. As far as identification, you're going to go through a very similar process as you would with any other disability. You're going to, create an intervention and do an RTI if that response isn't effective, and then take it to the next level. Then you, as an educator, will likely be doing a professional assessment, which is the one they suggested is most often used, is the scale for assessing emotional disturbance, where it'll be quickly answering questions that fit in the subcategories of IDEA for the criteria for qualification. It's also important to test the cognitive and intellectual abilities of these students so that we can evaluate the impact of their behavioral and emotional issues on their academic achievement. Other identification methods are these students need to be systematically observed in various school settings. We need to know how they act in the cafeteria, how they act in PE, how they respond to different adults with different instructive methods. We should know the family's mental health history, and we should also ask parents for a personal history of the student's emotional health. How were they as toddlers, as elementary students, or as high school students? How are they a year ago or 6 months ago? It helps if they can be interviewed by a psychologist or a therapist. It's useful to know their medical information, and we should also include a strengths-based assessment so that we know what these kids are good at, what strengths we can draw on as we try to get them help. There are a couple methods for teaching these students. One that I really love is reciprocal tutoring, where you put 2 students together to learn the content material. They take turns in the role of teacher and student. This is great for children with emotional disturbance because they need to learn the social skills as well as the content. So they first get to watch their peer model appropriate behavior, and then they get to engage in the same type of behavior. It's this constant, modeling and exercising, and they get to do both ends of that. So that's a great method that I like for teaching those students. There's also helpful teacher-led learning strategies like clear objectives, frequent student participation, short, clear sentences, encouragement and feedback, and breaking up big assignments. These are helpful because when we simplify the communication, it helps students comprehend better and be less frustrated in class. Breaking up big assignments also decreases student anxiety because they feel less overwhelmed by, 10 criteria or 10 steps for an assignment when you break it up into 2 and then you accomplish, and you move on to the next 2 and the next 2. And the physical movement helps with their restlessness and anxiety. More teacher-led strategies give them moderate and critical feedback, praise when you can, alternate less interesting activities with engaging ones, give these kids options, build on their interests, and use technology to engage students. And then last is hands-on learning. So for example, if you're a history teacher like I am, you might have students start with something less interesting to them, like reading a primary source and annotating it. And then after that, they might get to do a hands-on activity activity where they create a model of something that they just learned about, or where they create a piece of art, in reference to the material that they've just annotated and analyzed. So when you alternate those, it's helpful for students. It's important to remember that each of these students is going to be different, and the strategies and tools that we provide them will help engage them. So some kids are going to really love technology. These kids are technology natives, so that's going to be a way to engage them. And some students might really like hands-on learning. Some students might like group work. But when we look at them individually and we try to keep our communication and our expectations clear and concise, they can be successful in our classrooms. Other key components for teaching these students is to have a behavioral plan. So work with the student to talk to them about what their needs and goals are, and then you can create a contract with them that identifies your expectations and sets rewards. We know rewards are less successful over time, so maybe once a student has mastered one behavioral thing, we can reevaluate and come up with a new goal and a different reward. It's also crucial to have a positive relationship with the student. These kids need to know that they're cared about and in a safe environment with an adult they can trust, and to communicate and collaborate with family of the students so that what you're working on at school is being carried on at home. Resources for family. There's some great ones out there. I really like the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry's Emotional Dysfunction Resource Center. It has some great tools for monitoring your kids' mental health with them, some links to videos that could be helpful for them, and information for parents and children. The Child Mind Institute is also a great one, and that site is available in Spanish. There's a link at the top of the page. And for local resources, utahparentcenter.org, which is also available in Spanish. It provides information about disabilities and links to local resources and programs so that students and parents can hopefully meet up with other parents, get ideas, and be aware of what's available to them on a local basis. So that is my summation of emotional disturbance. I think we'll all see this in our class